Allianz. Supporting all 32 counties through the Allianz Leagues.
Hello and welcome to the Tyrone Independent.ie's GA podcast in association with Allianz. I'm Will Slattery. Delighted to be joined as always by Michael Verney. Michael, hello.
How's it going, Will?
Yeah, doing well. A very exciting weekend of Allianz League action on both fronts. You know, I know we were saying that there's not really many league finals. I know Offaly are going to be involved in one against Derry, but it made a lot of do or die games over the weekend, promotion and relegation on the line.
Yeah, it was one of the most, I'm sure there'll be real good championship weekends coming up, but it was so hard to keep track of different things that were going on, and there was so many games had such high stakes. It was a brilliant weekend, and even fans being back at them as well, and just that bit of noise. It's amazing what 200 people can do in a massive stadium, and just I suppose the appreciation of it all, and it does look like we're building up towards a really, really exciting summer. Everything kind of has leveled off in hurling a bit. We're back much happier with the way the game is, and football's probably never been in a ruder health than it is now. So yeah, brilliant summer ahead, hopefully.
Oh, definitely. I think my highlight of the weekend was Banty McInerney's party-esque shirt he was wearing in Clonus for the relegation playoff victory over Galway, and he had his old school Nokia just in the top pocket as well. It was great.
Yeah, I think his daughter actually tweeted some shirt, some phone, some win or something like that, and people were comparing him to that Matt LeBlanc picture that's going around from Friends where he had the arms folded. It kind of looked a bit similar, and he had a similar type of shirt on as well. But there was just some amazing things happen over the weekend, like Gavin White's goal, his lobbed goal. It's like remember when David Seaman was lobbed when they played Real Zaragoza in the Cup Winners' Cup final. It was just some brilliant moments, some brilliant
happened
goals.
At the World Cup as well. It happened to poor David more than once.
That's right. Yeah. But it was hard nearly to keep track of all the action over the weekend, and hopefully the summer will bring us the same sort of excitement.
Yeah, we'll try our best to keep track of it today. We're going to be joined in a little while by Brendan Cummins to discuss the kind of the end of the Hurling League. But first, we're delighted to have Sean McGoldrick and David Brady on the throw-in in association with Allianz to discuss all the football action. Guys, how are things? David, I might go to you first. So, I know there's still a league final to be played. Offaly, Michael's probably delighted they're going to be playing against Derry next weekend. But for the rest of the teams, David, thoughts are turning towards the championship. As we kind of reflect on the league campaign now, which teams for you will be the most pleased with what they've learned going into such a condensed season and the championship around the corner?
Well, I suppose if you take it from the top, you're going to have, without doubt, the top two, the Kerry and Dublin of this world. And Kerry would be very, very happy with their campaign. Impressive. And again, it was what I'd call all round a good league campaign with the key players playing massively well, but unearthing some good young talent as well emerging. That's once you're in that kind of a momentum going into championship, and it's vital. And you'll always see it, the teams that actually finish well in the league, they mightn't start well. I know it's very condensed and short league to take an overview like that, but again, if you look at the Armaghs of this world, Armagh, very, very impressive. Massively strong, but I think their attacking prowess has come on leaps and bounds. And again, you go between the yin and the yang of what it should have been for Monaghan yesterday at their feet in a very poor league campaign to come off the back of a massive victory in the last couple of minutes against Galway, and they're going, you know what, guys, all is good now, and that gives them confidence going into the championship. And if you have that kind of confidence, championship is coming in less than a week for some, in 2 weeks. It's good, because you do need, without a doubt, you need a positive start or a positive end to your league campaign for a championship that's not just around the corner, it's right in front of them.
Yeah, Sean, I know you were at the Kerry Tyrone game, and so you had to listen to Peter Keane try to downplay such a magnificent victory, saying, if there were no goals, the game could have been a draw. How impressed have you been, seeing them live in the flesh? Are they as lethal and devastating as they appear when we're watching the highlights, especially with a view to challenging Dublin and finally getting over the line against them?
Yeah, they're very impressive. I was actually at both their demolition derbies. The first one against Galway, and then last Saturday. And it's funny because I could do a collection of Peter Keane's sayings now and publish them, because he talked his way out of the Galway match by saying, it could have gone either way. And then last Saturday, when we were waiting for him to come over for the interviews, I was joking as to what excuse he'd make today. And that was sure enough. He came up with a good one, that if there was no goals, there wouldn't have been much in it. But that aside, Well, basically, if you let Kerry play that way, if you give them time and space on the ball, they have the forwards to punish you. And I mean, they are lethal. And any team that has David Clifford, who's basically on fire, they will be thereabouts in terms of the All Ireland. I mean, I think realistically, it's a 2-horse race now between themselves and Dublin. But it's funny being down there and listen to this, albeit studying the local journalists because there's not too many spectators getting in. They're still fearful of Cork. I think it's a traditional thing, that you could never take Cork for granted, and B, it's after what happened last year. But I mean, they are a top class side, and any team that has David Clifford on board, you have to be considered as All Ireland contenders. I suppose the one concern to have is injuries, and particularly injuries to the likes of David Clifford. What kind of team would they be All Ireland contenders if David Clifford wasn't playing? Possibly not. Whereas if Colin Callaghan wasn't playing for Dublin, you'd say that they would still be All Ireland favourites. So while they're not completely dependent on Clifford, he is still their big figure, and they need him playing at top notch. Now they have defensive issues, as we know, and they haven't settled on a midfield pairing yet. I mean, based on what we've seen so far, David Moran he's not mobile enough for Croke Park. So he's maybe a guy that you bring in the last 20 minutes. So they have issues, and they have issues at the back. I think Keane was probably happy enough that it was actually the defence played well. Now, admittedly, they didn't have much resistance, or they weren't put under huge pressure, but the defence did play well on Saturday. So maybe that's a work in progress, unlike the forward line. So, I mean, in terms of the All-Ireland race, they're up there. I think they're right up there with Dublin.
Yeah, so Michael, if we're operating that Dublin and Kerry are a good bit ahead of the pack, like what of the pack then? You had Tyrone, who people were intrigued to see with a new management team getting absolutely shredded at the weekend. Donegal taking on Dublin without Michael Murphy. They did look like they were missing their talisman, which I suppose is fair enough. Mayo, All-Ireland finalists last year, getting promoted again. I'm sure we'll get David's opinion on that in just a minute. Like, is there anyone you're seeing, or what do you make of some of these other challengers after their league campaigns?
No, it does look like there's a fair gap there's a bit of a gap even between 1 and 2, and then there's a fair gap from 2 to 3, and it's hard to even make sense of the pecking order. It's you don't know really what you saw from Donegal at the weekend. Obviously, they were missing Murphy. They made a lot of late changes even before throw-in, and I think Oran McNeedish nipped off with an injury, and I think Stephen McMenamin picked up an injury too. There are certain teams that could probably afford to be missing a couple of guys, the Dublins of this world. There's a couple that probably can't, and as Sean said, Kerry can't afford any big injuries to Clifford or anybody like that, and Donegal definitely can't afford to be missing any of their key men, particularly the likes of Murphy. I think at the other end of the scale, and I know they're in a relegation semi-final, but Armagh had a massive win against Roscommon. Roscommon team, I know they've been yo-yoing up and down from Division 1 to Division 2, and incidentally, I think the 2 Connacht titles they won were both from the Division 2, or they had been relegated, I think, those years. But Armagh were brilliant. The 2 O'Neills are very, very good. Up front, I think they hit 1-6 between them, and in fairness to Kieran McGeeney, he's brought Armagh from a pretty low base up to, like, I'd say they would have been one of the favourites, probably with Roscommon, to have been relegated from Division 1. So for them to stay up there is massive. From Roscommon point of view, then I think they lost Enda Smith as well, and Ronan Daly to injury. So it's amazing, like the proximity of league to championship. There's, like, if Roscommon are missing Enda Smith for championship, like they're in awful trouble. They're in big trouble. But I'd say probably, I don't know, it's hard to make sense of the pecking order really. But those two relegation games, Galway and Monaghan and Armagh Roscommon, were two probably of the better games of the weekend. And in fairness to Monaghan, they just don't seem to know how to get out of Division 1. They just are able to hold on by hook or crook. They've done it for the last couple of years. From a Galway point of view then, it kind of looked like that the wheels have come off a small bit. You could watch that game 10 times and you could just continue to wonder how Galway lost that game. So again, they have to try and turn things around. They turned around the Kerry result in the league earlier on, and a decent performance against Dublin, and then obviously beat Roscommon, and now they have to turn around a real sucker punch blow of going down to Division 2. So you find it hard to see them being able to turn around for championship as well. But there's so much going on. There's so much Like the football last weekend was brilliant. It was a championship weekend essentially.
It probably was the most important weekend of the year for a lot of those counties. Like, because realistically, most of those counties have no chance. They've definitely no chance of winning the All Ireland, and probably a lot of them haven't a huge chance of winning provincial. So this was what the whole season revolved around. What happened last weekend? I suppose we have to mention the two of the biggest losers was the two reigning provincial champions, Cavan and Tipperary, who now will play in Division 4 next year, and Cavan in particularly have gone from Division 1 to Division 4 in successive seasons. Actually, all under Mickey Graham, who's also brought them an Ulster title and an Ulster final appearance. So their league form certainly doesn't match their championship form. And the other thing to remember about that is that has huge ramifications for next year if the Tailteann Cup comes in, because that means that Cavan and Tipperary, basically, I think the rule, it maybe changed the rule, but as it stands at the moment, unless Cavan and Tipperary get to their respective provincial finals, and this is now in 2022, they won't be playing in the All-Ireland qualifiers, which is a huge thing particularly for the likes of Cavan, who with their tradition and everything. So it was a really pretty horrific weekend for both of them, and it's hard to see them. It's hard to see how they will bounce back in the championship. But then Cavan, just to compound it all, have to go to Oma for the quarter final of the Ulster Championship now, to Tyrone after what happened in Killarney. Probably the mood won't be great as well, but it's a huge match for both of those counties as well.
Yeah, Ulster always so interesting to watch. David, might get your opinion on the big two in Connacht then, Mayo and Galway. I mentioned Mayo; they're obviously All-Ireland finalists last year, getting promoted over the weekend, and then in contrast, Galway, since football resumed after the first lockdown, they've just nosedived. And I suppose you could give maybe the benefit of the doubt. Last year, they were coming back; it was already fractured, but now people have been back for quite a while. I suppose in some senses, but what are your sense of those two teams heading into the championship?
Yeah, and as you said, the top two, or maybe you look at it was the top three where it was common in Division 1, and all of a sudden now both of them are relegated, and it's just Mayo coming up from Division 2 to Division 1, and it is, and for me, from a Mayo perspective, not having played the Tyrones, not having gauged themselves against the likes of the Dublins and Kerrys, it is a negative going into the championship, because you come to the white heated battle in July, August, and you're coming up against these teams, and you just might say, geez, we're off the pace. I do think that from a Mayo perspective, it has been positive. I think the condensed league has helped them to say, you know what, 1, 2, 3 games, and we're out of here. Whereas you're not going on the road, and you're not playing 6 or 7 games to try and qualify. For me, the positive points from a Mayo perspective is that their key players, the Matthew Ruans, Oisin Mullen's been absolutely outstanding. That's the fulcrum, and these are the young guys. Again, Killian remaining to the fore. I know his injury yesterday on his 100th appearance for Mayo was there's a question mark. It's not a niggle. I think it's a little bit more than that. But they just have to say, right, take the positives out of it. But the one little negative I would see out of it is that you can see 2 goals to Clare yesterday. You can see 2 goals to Westmeath. You can see 2 goals to Meath. So you say, is it a defensive problem, or when you have 1-7 coming from your backs, you're like Oisin Mullen scores yesterday, Brickenden scores yesterday, Stephen Cohn, and you have Paddy Durkin scoring 2 points. So you have they have to go forward to get these scores, but I think there might be, from a kind of a formation point of view, just letting themselves open a little bit. Darren O'Neill, the midfielder for Clare, caused a lot of hassle yesterday, had a goal, and could have had a goal 6 or 7 minutes later, set up the next one. So like a big man that's plonked in the full forward line didn't. It showed a kind of a weakness, but who's going to pick up the big man when you have you haven't got a presence there in the full back line from a stature point of view or from a power point of view. But look I'm just delighted they got out of Division 2, because it's not the place you want to be. And again, from a perspective of momentum and crowds and playing the big teams, that's where Mayo want to be. From a Galway perspective, I take it back, and I take it back to the last nearly kick of the game. Galway are up. Monaghan are just looking for one thing and one thing only, a point. And again, they stood off them so defensively. If you go back to the goal to bring it to extra time, Galway are up. All of a sudden, just in the parallelogram, you have 3 Galway defenders versus 3 Monaghan defenders. You're going, with a minute and a half to 2 minutes left, you're going, there should be at least 3-1. There should have, from an experience point of view, or a setup, or from a tactical point of view, to say, guys, we're no good out in the 40, 30-yard line. If we're in that situation and we're 2 points up, 3 points up, and they're looking for a goal, we have to have 2 defenders on every Monaghan player. But they were left with a 3-on-3. So, and look at naivety as well. Inexperience counts for it. You don't let your man go inside, and he just swiveled his Galway defender and banged in the net, and that brought it to extra time. So there's a naivety there, and again, that comes from youth and inexperience. But you have to have them little things. You have to have them little things sorted out, and I can't put a finger on it. I think there was too much expectation of Galway from all quarters going into the last, as opposed to Porrick's tenure, and it hasn't come to bear fruit. And it really was. They had that game was done and dusted yesterday, and all of a sudden they found themselves now they're down back to Division 2 next year.
Yeah, Michael, it'll be interesting to see how teams like Galway, and I think they even play Roscommon in the kind of championship, so teams who've suffered that kind of negative end to the league campaign, how they pick themselves up morale-wise, because it's such a short turnaround. Even yesterday, like I saw Porrick Joyce on the TV afterwards. I think he was with his family. He looked absolutely gutted, and I saw in Colin Keyes' piece saying that he didn't speak to the media afterwards, which would be unusual for him. So maybe I think it sounded like he was quite devastated. He didn't want to face the music. So it's for managers as well to pick themselves up. It's a very short turnaround if you don't want to go out in your first game.
Yeah, you're not going into like traditionally a block of training now, 4 or 5 weeks where, and David, I'm sure, would have seen this in his own playing career, where it's like league is over, lads, we're starting championship training now. It's almost like back in the days, like, all right, we're off the beer for 5 or 6 weeks and we're going training. Like, that's not the case now. There's like, they've been doing their blocks of training the whole way through the league, and it's just basically just kind of nearly resting up and trying to get as many bodies on the pitch now at this stage. So very, very short turnaround to get any work done, and a short turnaround to actually any little mental fragility or anything like that that's developed throughout the league. Very, very hard to get rid of that. So I'd say whatever sports psychologists and that these teams have, they'll be in overdrive over the next couple of weeks, because it's such a short time to turn around. Just something interesting that David said there, I thought was really interesting. He talked about the Mayo defence and guys coming forward and scoring 1-7, and there's a lot of teams doing that. Kerry would have Paul Murphy and different guys driving forward, and I think the one team that, if you were to accumulate what their defenders score, would be probably a good bit less than most other teams, is actually Dublin, because their defenders tend to, they get forward, don't get me wrong, but they defend first, and that's why they're so solid at the back. They're not trying to make up for any frailties at the other end of the pitch. They defend first. Like, when was the last time Johnny Cooper scored? When was the last time Mick Fitzsimons scored? These guys focus primarily on their defensive duties, and I think that's why they're so solid at the back. And that's why, if Tommy Walsh or whoever comes in full forward, he won't cause the Dublin defence the same trouble that maybe a Darren O'Neill did yesterday. So I just think that's an interesting point, that they can attack, but they focus, primarily on their defensive duties.
Yeah, Jack McCaffrey, him stepping away, obviously a big part of that, and they seem to be kind of instructed to find their shooters in possession as well. I don't know if they're allowed to shoot even if they wanted to. And Sean, one of the talking points coming out of the weekend, initially it was a great win for Kildare against their Leinster rival, kind of jockeying for position, maybe to be behind Dublin in that province. But then Andy McEntee, after the game, making a pretty serious allegation that a Kildare player spat on one of his players, and that sparked off a melee towards the end. There was a couple of red cards there. It's kind of a strange way to finish the league campaign, isn't it?
Yeah, it was quite it was a funny kind of a game. I was listening to it. I was driving back from Kerry and I was listening to it on the radio. And I mean, for all during it, Kildare were absolutely in control. And then the loss, it got down to 14 men, and suddenly Meath found a sparkle for somewhere. And then the row was like it came out of nothing. So I wasn't there, so I can't comment on the spitting allegation, but it did spark out of nothing. So you would suggest that there was something that hit it off. Now I assume it'll be investigated, but it was It has been a pretty grim campaign for me. I mean, that they would have had ambitions of going straight back up like Mayo did, and they nearly rescued it, like typical of Meath. They came back and they took a great save in the last minute from the Kildare goalkeeper, Mark Donlan, to stop the game going into extra time. But it was at a huge cost, apart from losing, and obviously they will be playing in Division 2 next year, but it was also at a big cost to Meath because apart from the 2 red cards, which will probably, unless they get them appealed, that would mean the 2 guys, Conor McGill and Brian Conlon, will be out for the next day. But also got two big serious injuries with Brian Menton and Donald Keoghan, Keoghan probably has been their outstanding player for the last 5 years, and they look like maybe long-term injuries. So all in all, it was a high attrition game for me, who they're not involved in the first round of the Leinster Championship, but so they'll find it hard to pick it up. But on a sort of a broader topic, I think Kildare are probably the team best equipped to challenge Dublin in the medium or long term. Now, it won't happen this year or probably next year, but if you look back on it, Kildare have had more success at underage level than any other county in Leinster, and the younger guys on the Kildare squad, Jimmy Hylands and that, they would have played on minor and under 20 teams who beat Dublin. I mean, Kildare won I think it was the inaugural under 20 All Ireland. So Jack O'Connor has assembled a decent squad there. Now, last year they had a disaster, like they shipped 5 goals against Meath in the championship. As somebody said, they didn't have a good COVID. So I think now, as I say, it won't happen this year, but watch out for them in the next 2 or 3 years. The experience of playing in Division 1 it'll be a huge boost to them. So I think when and if Dublin's reign eventually ends in Leinster, it'll probably be Kildare might be the team that will take their scalp.
Yeah, and if we're talking about attrition, I think Kildare lost Paul Cribben, Jimmy Hyland, and Daniel Flynn was carrying an injury as well.
Oh yes, yeah. So it was a strange kind of a game for a league game. It was like a full-blooded championship match, like with all these injuries. But I think Michael, who probably haven't played with him, a better view than me. But I think it's probably part of the problem is that they're trying to condense so much training into such a short space of time, and also suddenly the pitches are very hard. And I think that's probably the reason, because if you look through all the teams, they all have a lot of injuries at the moment, and there's no time to recover. It's like this championship is in 2 weeks' time, or for most counties 3 or 4. So it'll be an interesting summer. Somebody said yesterday, it's whatever team can get the most fit players onto the field for the key matches. That could be a factor as well.
On that, guys, and Mike mentioned it. For me, I used to call it the "oh Jesus" time of the year, because the league was finished and you're going, "Oh Jesus, this is serious now. We're going to be going to 4-6 weeks of absolute torture." And again, even talking to club managers across the country, the number of players that are picking up niggles, that are picking up slight injuries, and it's not knocks because they're not in the physical stakes just right yet, but it's the sedimentary thing of having no training or not being able to do these quick movements, or the quick turning over the last 6 or 7 months, that all of a sudden your body is going, here, hold on a second, I'm not used to this. This is not what you've been preparing me for the last 6 months. Maybe you've been doing your runs or your gym work, but that high intensity, it's what they're used of, but their body isn't used of it, and the amount of injuries is widespread across the whole spectrum of GA club and county, and it will be interesting to see who has the fittest team and who picks up the least amount of injuries, because it is as you like, no matter what team you look at, there's a number of guys out that have had a very short season so far, and it's you kind of get the balance right, and people say, backroom teams and strength and conditioning and physio and prehab and rehab teams, they're where they're going to earn their crust now, because it's about getting the body at the right level at the right time, but not pushing them too much, because there is a big requirement going over the next couple of weeks. And again, it's about timing it, engaging it, and having a panel that's experienced enough and fit enough to take one another's place if there is the injuries or niggles that are someone's out for a week or 2 weeks.
said there'd be a fair bit of bubble wrap going around over the next couple of weeks. It's there too, because like to get injured in training now, coming up to a match, would be an absolute disaster. Whatever about picking up knocks in all these matches. So it's like a high wire act almost for a lot of the managers to get. You need to get time into guys, and you need to get lots of training and games under their belt, but you can't push them over the edge, and you're it's like a seesaw almost and balancing act.
And there's no getting away from the fact that like some teams can take more risk than others. Like Mayo can probably afford to keep Killian O'Connor on ice for a game or two. They're playing Sligo. If they win that, they play Leitrim. Like, without being disrespectful to those two teams, Mayo can probably afford to. Michael Murphy, though, is probably needed for Donegal. They're away to Down and then away to Derry if they win that. So it's interesting even. And for Dublin, John Small probably isn't needed, for a couple of weeks. So it really just kind of put a focus on how the draw has broken for certain teams in that regard as well.
Well, that also highlights, that's a long-term issue, how unfair the provincial system is. Like, and that it illustrates the case you mentioned there is a good case in point, because Donegal they have to play Down, Derry, and then probably Tyrone to even get to the Ulster final. Whereas, realistically, even though Kerry might have some fear of Cork, it looks like Kerry and Dublin, and certainly Dublin, have nothing major to fear in Leinster. So they're basically guaranteed All-Ireland semi-final spots already. Whereas, if the likes of Galway, Mayo, or any of the teams in Ulster took that for granted, well, they'd be out in the first round. And I suppose the other thing, there's no back door this year. So it's like back to the old ways of the championship. Like their season could and will be, for a lot of teams, it'll be over in it's hard to believe it'll be over in 2 weeks' time.
Mm. And that was like that yesterday, guys. It was like championship, but there was no back door. If you won, you're promoted, or it was not the Division 1 title that was at stake as such, but everything else was up for play. If you lost, you were gone down. This one game was the game. It was a championship game. It was winner takes all. And again, from a championship perspective, that's going to be massively interesting over the coming weeks and months, because some of the big names are not going to be at the level they'll want to be, and there is going to be surprises. And again, you're going, Jesus, how did Tipperary and Cavan win a Munster and an Ulster championship, and all of a sudden find themselves in Division 4 now? And you don't know who's going to come out of who's going to be this year's Cavan, who's going to be this year's Tipperary, because it's a different type of football. No matter what people say, it's if there is the opportunity or the second chance or second bite of the apple in a championship perspective, it does take on a different demeanour. But when it's a winner takes all, it is what I suppose myself and Sean are the older generation. It's an all or nothing knockout championship, and that brings its own positives to it.
Yeah, Michael, with that being the case, it is interesting that Offaly have opted along with Derry to play that league final. And I take John Mon's point that, a game in Croke Park for this young team, it's an experience of a lifetime. But then you have to weigh that up. The championship game is the next weekend. Like, what, from an Offaly person, what do you think? Would it have been better off just to park it? You have your promotion and focus on that first championship game. Yeah,
I was surprised by it, to be honest with you. As you said, like, they are more than likely going to pick up a knock. Touch wood, they won't, but you're more than likely are going to pick up a knock. It's an easier situation for Derry. They're obviously waiting. The winners are Down in Donegal, so they've got a bit more time. So another competitive game probably suits them perfect. Whereas Offaly, it could leave them hamstrung a bit going in against a Loud side that obviously are promoted from Division 4 now as well, and back moving pretty well. So, but the offset of that is, I suppose, and Sean said it earlier, for a lot of teams, league is going to be more important than championship. Are Offaly going to get to play championship in Croke Park this year? Very, very unlikely, bar they get to a Leinster final. Well, hopefully, it'd be great if they did get to a Leinster final. But this is a glorious opportunity, I suppose, for them to play in Croke Park and for them to get some silverware. Getting promoted is one thing, but at the end of the year, if Offaly are Division 3 champions, that would be a massive, massive thing. To win a title in Croke Park would be huge. So it's kind of I suppose it's a difficult kind of situation, but they probably see the risk is probably potentially worth the reward of actually playing in Croke Park and winning something. So, and yeah, it's great from our point of view that we're looking forward to a final. It's one thing being promoted, because potentially in Offaly could have two pieces of silverware in the space of a couple of weeks, which would be great after all the doom and gloom and various rock bottoms that we've hit in recent years. It'd be great.
Yeah.
On that point, and I suppose from experience, guys, from John Monaghan, I remember when he took us over in '96, we were in Division 3 from a Mayo perspective. And the massive focus he had on, it was silverware, on success in Croke Park, on building momentum, on positivity, on the team morale and everything else. And we went on and won Division 3 that year, and ended up in an Ireland final a couple of months later. And I think he's willing to take that risk, and he's willing to take that gamble, because you will, if it doesn't work out in the championship, or it doesn't work out the following week or whatever, or it comes back to bite him. If you have success and you have that kind of, geez, we had some crack last year, we had some, from an Offaly perspective, we had a win in Croke Park, we got silverware, we're in Division 2, there's a lot of big boys there. That whatever happens in the championship will maybe be soon forgotten, but I think it's a gamble worth taking from a very young team, and that experience in Croke Park and the possibility of winning silverware is, I think you just can't leave that off the table.
Well, it was an exciting few weeks of Allianz Football League action. There's so much stuff still to come. David, for the moment, thanks so much for joining us.
A pleasure. Look after yourselves.
Cheers, David. Well, it's time to turn our attention to hurling now on the Throw-In podcast in association with Allianz. We're delighted to welcome Brendan Cummins to the show. Brendan, how are you?
Well, how's it going? All good. Well, outside of Welsh Park yesterday, I suppose it's all good.
Yeah, and I saw you were writing about that in your column today. I suppose reflecting back on the league as a whole. Going into the championship now, which team do you think is the happiest? Which team learnt the most and is kind of set up the best, do you think, going into the big games to come?
I think we always talk about momentum, and I think Limerick probably are the ones who have built up a little bit of that. It looked like they decided they were going to get their act together against Cork and smother them. Obviously, the Westmeath game was neither here nor there, but they'll be happy in that they know what they want to try to achieve. I think Tipperary and Waterford then after that, and Galway will be the ones who will be the other ones who will be extremely happy. Outside of Welsh Park yesterday, which Waterford, in fairness, can be a little bit like Tipperary's kryptonite, if you like, in that when they start to run the ball through the middle, it caused Tipperary a huge amount of problems. So that'll give Liam Cahill huge amount of hope, I suppose, and that his project is still on the rise, and Liam Sheedy a little bit to work on. So those teams, I think, will have been extremely happy with the way the league has gone. I think Kilkenny, normally they just do what Kilkenny do, they just work hard, they try to win every match. It doesn't appear like there's massive tactics going on. They play it as they see it, but at the same time, they still had a very strong league campaign as well. I think the ones who probably struggled the most were Dublin. They were the ones I was most disappointed with throughout the league. I'm waiting for a bit of madness in Dublin, a bit of craziness to come into them, and I'm not seeing it. It's okay if you're going to be cool, calm and collected if it looks like you have a plan or a pattern to play, but at the moment I just can't see what they're trying to achieve. They went with the sweeper before, at least there was a plan, whereas now I'm not too sure what they're trying to do, and that was probably the most disappointing part of the league for me, was just seeing the way Dublin have just kind of meandered along. Now maybe they may explode into the championship like they did a number of years ago, but at the moment, they look like they're the ones who have been the biggest losers in the league, we'll say.
Yeah, Michael, it's funny. It's we're sitting here after 5 rounds. It's probably the first time we've actually really talked about Dublin, and it shows that they didn't really fire a shot against any of the big teams. It didn't really trouble them. I think Brendan's probably hit the nail on the head. They probably, of all the teams, they're probably sitting here. What have we really learned? Do we have any momentum now going into the big games? Yeah,
they look a bit rudderless, and they've definitely slipped further away from the probably big 4 or big 5, I'd say. And that game in Parnell Park a couple of years ago against Galway seems like an awful long time ago, when they kind of brought, Brendan talks about that madness there, like it was kind of hellfire and brimstone that night in Parnell Park, and that just seems like a long time ago. It doesn't look like you're going to get something similar out of the current Dublin outfit. And the bluntness of their attack, if anything, they've it looks like they have less of an attacking threat even than they had a couple of years ago. Donald Burke has obviously stepped up. I think, they hit 118 at the weekend. I think 110 of it was from place balls. You just wonder who's going to step up. They're still experimenting with Crummy up there. I know Liam Rush ended up moving up to the forwards the other day. You'd wonder then, are they settling on him at number 6, or who are moving him up? You'd wonder, are there a few question marks there, but you would question the direction that they're going in. I cannot wait for the Antrim game. I think Antrim will smell a massive opportunity there, and if you look at how their 1B campaign went, like, there's not too many people who would have told you beforehand that they get 2 wins and a draw and be very, very competitive against Clare and Kilkenny. So I think they'll smell a massive opportunity in that Leinster quarter final.
Yeah, and I was looking just at the top of the table, Sean. Kilkenny and Galway finished top of their respective division, so they could actually potentially play in a Leinster final. We might actually get a resolution to this league campaign. It's interesting when Brendan mentioned Kilkenny. You know, they wrapped their side of the draw up with a week to spare. They didn't really ever seem to have to get out of second gear, because I suppose the way it was done up, the kind of one side was a bit stronger than the other. But still, Brian Cody brought them to a league, kind of half league champions.
Well, as Brendan said, they're relentless. I mean, that's their DNA, and particularly Cody's DNA for the last 20 years. It's win, win, win. They treat a Walsh Cup match as important as an All-Ireland semi-final. So they have this winning culture, and it's born out of hard work. I mean, that's the basic requirement for any Kilkenny player. You have to work hard, and Cody tends to pick his teams based on relentless hard work and that warrior-like qualities. It'll be interesting to see what they do in the championship, because, as we know, there has been a bit of disquiet in Kilkenny about, there hasn't been opposition to Brian Cody's appointment, but, for the first time ever, there's probably been some rumblings. So they probably need to win Leinster again, at least. So it'll be interesting to see how they will approach, because we assume that they will be playing Wexford, that Wexford should beat Laois, even though Wexford haven't been going particularly well either. But it'll be interesting to see what tactics they employ against Wexford. I mean, in the league match, I'd say Wexford weren't at a full tilt that day. It was interesting how Kilkenny played the ball through the lines. They didn't just go long with all their puck outs. So that's a fascinating game, and it's a big game in terms of how the whole season pans out, even if there is a backdoor in hurling, which makes it's a different type of championship than the football. But it's definitely a big year for Kilkenny, and but I mean, regardless of the probably obviously they don't have the same quality of players as they used to have available, but they are fighters, and you're guaranteed that Kilkenny won't give up until the final whistle blows. So that always makes them dangerous.
Yeah, Brendan, how do you assess the Leinster Championship now off the back of this league? As I mentioned there, Galway and Kilkenny, if they were to play, there would be a league crown on the line as well as a Leinster final medal. Wexford kind of were hit and miss. They ended up finishing second, I think, on that side of the draw. We touched on Dublin there. Antrim potentially have an opportunity to cause a shock. Galway do look maybe the second best challengers overall. So there's a lot of talking points there.
There is, and I think if Galway are going to win the All-Ireland, they're going to have to win Leinster. I think last year, down the home straight against Kilkenny, if it wasn't the scoreboard there, you'd say Galway are just better than Kilkenny, but the reality is they weren't better on the scoreboard, and then they brought that into the home straight. Having said that, I suppose Mannion and Canning were out for that last 10 minutes against Limerick in the semi-final, but Galway do need silverware. They are that kind of a team that if they do win Leinster and get their tails up, certainly it'll infuse them with a bit more confidence that they need, I think, to win. I think they're one of the teams, Galway, that have a couple of more years maybe left in this crop of players. And it should dawn on them now that this is the time. Joe Canning mightn't be as fit again going forward. You know what I mean? Mannion, these lads. So they do need to win. Kilkenny are obviously going to be the ones that can grind it out. But I certainly agree that the game between Antrim and Dublin is going to be massive. Because if Dublin lose that, they're in a relegation game. And they're only one game away from the trapdoor that brings you down into the Joe McDonagh. Now, that's not a space that Dublin Hurling would want to be in, but Antrim and Dublin are a stark contrast to each other. Antrim know the way they want to play. They've had success. They've won silverware. They've played in Croke Park. They've pretty much beaten anybody that had been a chance of winning against, whereas Dublin are absolute polar opposites. So that game for me is the biggest game in the Leinster Championship. And after that, then I think Kilkenny and Galway will meet in the final, because Wexford don't seem to have the same energy to play the running game that they've had since 2019. I still think if they had a Caroline Curran figure or somebody in there to get the heads right, to get rid of the scars of 19, they might play with a bit more freedom, but they haven't reached those heights, and you can't just do that in 10 minutes before the match decide you're going to do it. So I think Galway will end up winning Leinster because they have to, and I still think Antrim will have enough to beat Dublin, and that's going to cause chaos around the whole Dublin setup if that happens.
Yeah, it's set up to be an absolute cracker. Michael, I'd be interested to get your opinion on Clare. I suppose they started with 2 defeats, narrow defeats to Antrim and Wexford. There was alarm bells going. They finished it out with 3 consecutive wins, including a very impressive one against Kilkenny. I suppose you could say that Kilkenny had wrapped it up a week earlier, so perhaps they weren't quite as, in tune as they might have been. But as Sean pointed out, that's rarely a problem with Kilkenny. So I think you have to give Clare some credit for that victory. And now all of a sudden they're going in with a lot more momentum than we would have thought, 2-3 weeks ago.
Yeah, in fairness, I think Brendan wrote the day after they were beaten by Antrim how maybe that wasn't as much of a surprise as a lot of people thought it was, and it was the first day out for Clare as well, and they had John Conlon at centre back, and they were learning on their feet a small bit. I think I was among many different people that said he should be moved back up full forward. In fairness, I love the ignorance of Brian Lohan in many ways. He's persisted with it. It's definitely reaped some dividends as the league goes on. Looks like he's going to be playing centre back now. If anything, their half back line is one of their strongest lines now. With Dermot Ryan was brilliant again. He was relocated from half forward as well. If you look at their a lot of their names on paper, and you're looking at Tony Kelly nominated for Hurler of the Year last year, one of the best players in the country. Aidan McCarthy's, becoming a massive player for them. Cottle Malone, David Reedy, Shane O'Donnell, John Conlon, Conor Cleary, Rory Hayes. Like, they have a lot of good personnel. Now, fair enough, they mightn't have, the same squad maybe as a Limerick or a Galway, but on a given day, they have they have as good a personnel as anyone. And in Kelly, Tony Kelly's playing. He's been playing brilliant for the last 5 or 6 years, and was obviously Hurler of the Year in 2013. But his game has gone to another level. It's almost a level of defiance because everybody's saying that Clare are in trouble and different things, and he's kind of raised his game to another level. And they'll fancy their chances going in against Waterford. That's a really intriguing game to me. That's as intriguing as the Cork Limerick game on the other side. And I think Clare have kind of turned the corner now. And what do you want to learn from the league? You want to experiment, try and have a fair idea of your best 15. And I'd say Brian Lohan has accomplished that. He's a fair idea of his best 15. And, contrast how they finished the league to how they started it. And now they're in a good position going into championship. And with the injuries down in Waterford yesterday, I think they'll, no more than Antrim against Dublin, they'll sniff a good upset there as well. And that's going to be an intriguing game.
Yeah, and in terms of the injury suffered by Austin Gleeson, I suppose we're still waiting to hear how long he might be out for, but the picture certainly looked like he was in quite a lot of pain when he was being taken off, so that's definitely one to look out for. Just like in the football, as we touched on earlier, a lot of teams nursing some injuries to key men. Sean, another interesting team, just looking at the league table, how it all shook up in the end, is Cork. They scored 18 goals across 5 matches. At some stages, we were talking, how are they the team to beat going into the championship? They ultimately came second last. I know there's some head-to-heads and there was a few draws in there, but you would have thought they would be up at the top end of the table. They have that big game against Limerick to come. How do you assess where they are at the moment?
Yeah, well, we're talking about momentum there, and they certainly have lost it. It's hard to judge what the Limerick match was about, because they obviously, neither team were willing to show their hand. But Limerick, attacked the Cork puck at the short Cork puck out, and with devastating effect in the first half. And then yesterday, for most of the match, it looked like Cork were going to bounce back, and they were playing very well. And then suddenly it was almost a mini collapse in the last 15 minutes. I know there was a few tactical changes. Mannion went up centre forward and made a huge difference. So you'd wonder about where their headspace is, because obviously, since the draw was made, everybody knew the season would revolve probably against their season would revolve how they fared against Limerick. But I'm sure there are doubts even in the players' minds now as to, are they ready for the challenge of taking on the All-Ireland champions now? I think we'll see a different Cork performance that day than we did in the league. But they're basically all their eggs in one basket now. I think they're going to go with the short game and hope that the speed and pace they have in the team will open up defences and score goals. But I think there would be question marks about is that the right way to go, and particularly if teams close them down, will they be able to have they got a viable plan B is, I think, a key question for them. They don't have a great record in the back door either. I think the last time they made progress was 2013. So the Limerick match obviously will tell the tale. Now they beat Limerick before when Limerick were All-Ireland champions. So, but I think Limerick will still be strong favourites in that match. So it could be the back door for them, and we'll see how they get on that.
I think crucially, when Cork looked well during the league, not the teams were like letting them play on purpose, but there was a degree of openness to that Waterford game. There was very little physical contact, we'll say, involved in it. To contrast that with the Limerick game, when Limerick got in their faces and just did not allow them have an easy ball, didn't allow them play out from defence or anything like that yesterday. And when Galway really got into their stride in the second half yesterday, what did they do? They took on Mark Coleman. They made some of these guys actually defend. They made them go man on man and probably exposed them a small bit. So you just wonder when Cork come up against Limerick, like, for all their playing around and as slick as they are on the ball, like when it comes to the White Heat Championship and it's man on man a lot of the time, physically, I wonder, will Galway be able to stand up to Limerick? I'm not so sure. I think they will create an awful lot. They create a lot of goal chances in particular, and they did against Limerick the last day. But I'm just not so sure physically. Like if you were to compare Limerick, Galway, Kilkenny, even Waterford to Cork, I would say that most of those teams are a bit more physically advanced than Cork. Now, in fairness, people would say that Cork should go along, which in many ways is ridiculous because they're playing to what they have. Like, they have small, nippy players who are real good ball players. So, of course, they're going to play that style. If they had, a couple of big 6'2" forwards that can win their own ball, then they're going to play more ball down there. So they're only, Kieran Kingston, in fairness, is only, he's cutting his cloth to measure. But I'm just not sure physically if they'll be able to match Limerick when it really comes to the cut and thrust of it.
And Brendan, what about your own county Tipperary? I know you were talking about them today in your column in the Irish Independent as well. Just like looking even at the fixture list, they're not back out until July 4th. They play the winners of Waterford and Clare. So they have a bit of time now to reassess, to regroup, to maybe get a bit of training in if that's what they need, or to take the foot off the pedal if that's what they need. Like, what are your thoughts on how they're going?
I think they're going well. I think the problem for Tip, and it's been the problem, I suppose, since highlighted by Wexford running through Tip in 2019, and none of the players are essentially getting any younger around the middle third of the pitch. Teams will always feel they have a chance when they run at Tip. And you could see with Waterford the weekend, they just kept trying to run it. And eventually, when they gave up the puck out to Tipperary, Tip aren't overly comfortable with trying to run it out from Cathal Barrett or the corner backs or full back line out. I think teams have decided now that when Tip get the ball between their own 45 and 21, they're going to leave them hit it because they know that they're going to go long. They're going to try to find Callanan into the corners. And I think if Tip are to do anything, the ball will need to go deep in around the penalty area and let the lads stick work, like what we've seen in Kilkenny with Henry Shefflin and Eddie Brennan back in the good old days. I don't think while hurling has gone all around the place about tactics and all that, I think the ball goes into the danger area often enough. Then that you're going to have an opportunity with the class hurlers that are in there. You take yesterday, like Jason Ford, the ball, Waterford won the one possession and Tip Stickworth took it off him. And once they get inside, it's just a goal and that's the end of it. And 2 or 3 of those opportunities will be enough for Tip to maybe score 320 and that will be enough to get him over the line. But they still have, I think, just try to get leg around the middle of the field. Yesterday, Breen and Dan McCormack didn't really work because the middle of the field, Cadell was kind of overrun. But I do like Michael Breen and Dan McCormack in the wings. They give that extra bit of protection coming back and they have good energy. But no, Tip, I think overall will be very, very happy where they're at. Certainly way, way better than we were when we came back in 20 trying to defend the All-Ireland after the long COVID break. So Liam will be happy now, I think, with what he's seen. A few of the younger lads have stepped up a bit as well, which will help.
Yeah, Sean, what do you make of Tipperary? Obviously, as Brendan mentioned, they're All-Ireland defence in 2020 after, the COVID disrupted year. Didn't really, catch fire. They lost to Limerick, by a fair amount in Páirc Uí Chaoimh and then were eliminated by Galway. Do you think they're better set this year to maybe have a crack at it?
Yeah, well, I think there might be one of these teams that have a historical baggage about defending All-Ireland titles. I mean, it's said every year they haven't defended it successfully since 1960, the mid 60s and all. So I think when that baggage is removed, to play with a bit more freedom, and I think as Brendan said, I think Liam Sheedy will be happy enough with how the league went. I don't think it was ever a big priority to finish top of it. So they're in a good place. It's Munster Championship it's literally a bit like the Ulster football. Anything can happen on the day, but they're in rude health, and I think they have a very good management team, and I think they're probably dark horses. I mean, they're not being talked up to the same level as Limerick, so they will be quite happy with that. I think they, psychologically, I think they're better and they're more likely to do something when they're underdogs.
Yeah, Michael, as we kind of, reflect on the league as we move towards the championship, it's funny, this is probably one of the first weeks we haven't been having a big conversation about the future of the sport. We're kind of just focusing really on the results and how teams are shaping up. Has any kind of fears you had maybe around, the amount of frees being given and stuff like that, has that died down a little, do you think?
Yeah, I don't know what conversations have happened behind the scenes, but referees have definitely, the advantage rule, from what I saw yesterday down in Walsh Park, the referees were gone back to the old advantage rule. There was a couple of scores got that, they were fouled and they were let go and the shot was taken and went over the bar, and the game was able to, progress as normal rather than, the second the player was fouled, he never got a chance to get away and take a shot, and there was a free and the momentum was stopped. So I don't know exactly what's going on behind the scenes, but it definitely looks like we're kind of back to normality in that sense. It's happened a few times with the league and hurling in recent years where there's a big overreaction the first week or the second week, and then things settle down by the fourth or fifth week. I will say that this, and I wasn't the biggest fan of it coming in, but the sin bin and the new penalty kind of area has definitely reduced. I don't think we've not really been talking about cynical fouls. Any of them that have happened, there's been a penalty, and in most cases a goal and a sin bin, and it's such a big punishment that nobody just even risks it anymore, and it does place a bit more quality in the art of defending. I suppose the other thing then as well, the high scoring games, you have to remember, it's height of summer now, it's perfect, peak perfect conditions for hurling at the moment, and even with goalkeepers, and I know there's a couple of hundred people back at matches now, but the time from when the ball goes wide to the ball being restarted is a couple of seconds quicker than it was. With the water break, each half is nearly 40 minutes, so you're looking at 80 minutes nearly in a game now. The scores are bound to go up a small, but I don't think it's any one factor, be it the weight of the ball or any of these things. It's just a number of factors. I thought we had a brilliant weekend, to be honest with you. I thought that was a real entertaining game in Walsh Park. Couldn't let the show go by without talking about Desi Hutchinson's 2 goals. The first goal was ridiculous. Jack Prendergast, who was brilliant, solo threw a hand pass to him, and he just a volley that you'd see, a drive volley that you'd see at Wimbledon or at the French Open over the weekend, a brilliant finish. Then a real kind of instinctive forwards goal for the next goal where he turned inside and got a great goal. There's some brilliant scores over the weekend. And just on Waterford, there's a Shane Bennett's back in the attack now, and there's a real, I suppose there should be, given that they're brothers, but there's a telepathic kind of nature almost between him and Stephen, and even Kieran Bennett. Stephen set him up for a goal at one stage yesterday, even though he mishandled it. There's just a couple of things happening that are really exciting in that kind of Waterford attack, and I think we're primed for a really good championship. When you're really looking forward to Leinster quarter final with Dublin and Antrim, that's a really exciting game. You're really looking forward to Waterford and Clare, and you're really looking forward to Cork and Limerick. I think we're primed for a really good championship, and I think most of the fears that we had about hurling have kind of been allayed at this stage, and that's been the case the last couple of years. Naturally, things just settle down, and we've got the game that we want now.
Yeah. The other interesting thing about it, and this probably applies to football as well, is how the water break is impacting on particularly on tactics. I mean, it's basically now you're talking about 4 halves really. I know you only get 90 seconds or something for the water break, but it is enough to it'll be interesting exercise to follow all the matches. It is enough to break a team's momentum and to get it's enough time for managers to reset or to make a few little tactical changes. So it is a new factor that has kind of come into the game in the last since COVID, since last year, and obviously managers are getting more used to it now, so they're ready for it. So I think we'll see more games of 4 quarters now with momentum changing after the water break.
Just a quick one on that, Brendan. I know you were involved with Kerry the last couple of years, and particularly last year with the water break. Without giving away any state secrets, what would have been your mantra for the water break? Is it 20 seconds of water, 40 seconds of instruction, or what way do you kind of work it? Because it is such an important time.
Well, it is. Well, they can listen while they're drinking anyway, is the first thing. And after that then, you get your... We'd have done was, I suppose, I'd have gotten the stats down to see where we're winning or losing, what areas of the pitch we're struggling, get maybe 10, 15 seconds of feedback from the players, backs, forwards, you happy, what's going on. you'll hear it then in a flash. We're confused. Who's marking this lad? Who's marking that lad? And then you really have only a minute to say, right, this is what half forward line might not be coming far enough back to pitch. That's normally the problem when things are going wrong. So you're always looking at your half forward and are you working hard enough? You might ask the three of them to come back and support the half back line more, which means you can run the ball back up the pitch, which normally kills momentum of a team. If a team gets on top of you, normally what you'll find is that your half forward line are all over the pitch, right? So that water break is fantastic. And that's why, Sean, I think you'll see that momentum is broken because everyone gets back into their set channels again. And you reset because you're out in the middle of the pitch in the heat that's going to be there. You end up making a run back into your own full back line, for example, if you're a wing forward. It could take you a minute and a half to 2 minutes to get back out the pitch again. Whereas at the start after the water break, everybody's set on the start line again, we'll say. And then that kills momentum and everyone gets to find their feet. But I think you have that minute and a half to get that set up right. For me, that's the key in every water break we've ever had is what are the three half forwards doing? And if you have them right, then everything else flows, I think, from there.
And do you think will it stay now? Like, will there be a sort of a push on? Well, this is just in both hurling and football. Will there be a push on now, sort of post-COVID, to keep it?
I think management teams would want to keep it. I certainly loved the fact that you had contact with the players after every 18 minutes and then another 15 later you had a longer break, you know what I mean? But I think as a general for the spectacle, I think we'd probably be living with COVID for the rest of our lives, so it'd be a great excuse to keep it. But I think the general public would rather see the game flow from start to finish and have that momentum. And when someone gets you off balance, we'll say that they'll still take off a helmet and they'll still lie down like somebody's leg is broken. They'll still get a minute and a half or 2 minutes to break the play. So the dark arts will be back in full swing again, but I think the 4 quarters will probably stay in the long term.
There was various stages, Brendan, when the contact lenses just hopped out of your eyes at different stages when you might be after conceding a goal and things.
Yeah, it is. I said it one day doing a co-commentary with Nicky Quaid that he had a contact lens. I don't even think he wears contacts, but anyway, that's another day's work. So that's important. Hey, look at you lads. Look, we tried to make the game very clinical and clean with the tackle and all that. If you look at the rule book, right, the paragraph of the rule book in hurling around the tackle is about that size. The tackle was defined in football about 2 years ago, I think, and the paragraph is that size. So I think at the end of the year, we'd all do well probably to set up a committee, look at the tackle in hurling and nail it. Because when you start introducing rules in hurling like we saw at the start of the year and make it like this thing there's black and white, we have absolute chaos and everyone gets confused. So I think you're right, Michael, in that referees have applied common sense and our game is just getting better and better because of it. And I pray to God that they keep doing that from the championship now in a couple of weeks' time because we're in for some summer. That's a fact now.
Yeah, well, it's great to be finishing our Allianz League coverage on a positive note. We'll be back next week looking ahead to the football and hurling championships. In the meantime, you can subscribe to the Tyrone podcast on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, or listen on independent.ie. So until next time, thanks for listening and goodbye.
Allianz. Supporting all 32 counties through the Allianz Leagues.